Hi there, I'm Herb Stevens, the skiing weatherman at Gore Mountain in the beautiful Adirondacks of New York with another installment of the Weather Weenies. Now, we're almost up to the holidays, so the topic of weather is on the minds of all skiers and riders coast to coast all around the Northern Hemisphere. So let's dig into what is about to happen over the next couple of weeks, and I think for some people it's the best news they've heard at this time of year in many years. In red, I have drawn out the basic pattern that we're going to see for the next couple of weeks in the jet stream, or at the jet stream level, about 18,000 feet. I expect a trough off the west coast, small one, and it's not going to have a big impact, but I'll talk about it in just a moment. A fairly sizable ridge over western North America and a big trough over the eastern half of the country. Generally speaking, in the wintertime, when you have troughs, you're talking about cold air. Where you have ridges, you're talking about tranquil weather with air that's normal to perhaps slightly above. Now, earlier in the week, a storm came out of this trough and swung through the southern Rockies, and it brought a lot of snow to Utah and northern Arizona and parts of New Mexico and also southwestern Colorado. Upwards of 4 feet of snow fell in the mountains of south central Utah. That storm, when it came out onto the plains, and we're having the same fun with our marker this week, but when it came eastward, it weakened, and it really didn't amount to much when it got into the eastern part of the country. But in the middle of this week, as the storm passed through New England, it started to tap into, there's something high-tech, it tapped into colder air in Canada. And that Arctic air is going to be in place in the Northeast and in the Great Lakes and in the Southeast right through the weekend prior to Christmas. So the snowmaking guns are really going to be firing. If you're skiing or riding east of Chicago this weekend, you got to bring your goggles because the snow guns are going to be going as the mountain crews try to get as much terrain as possible open for the holiday weekend. Now, before I talk about the potential for a big storm on the East Coast, we'll go back to the west for a while. Again, they had snow in the southern Rockies this week, and that was much needed snow because the amount of open terrain has been a little sketchy up till this point. The northern Rockies are in pretty good shape, and I think the coastal ranges, the Cascades of Washington and Oregon down into the Sierra of California, they're going to see some jet energy firing off the coast from time to time over the next week or so, and they will get some snow, not heavy snow, but light to moderate snow that will gradually help them build up their bases and build up their trail counts. The central Rockies and northern Rockies, I think they're going to be quiet for a little while now, as most of the action will be focused in the eastern half of the country. And that's where we have the potential for a very substantial snowfall coming up right around the time of the beginning of the week of Christmas. I guess that date would be roughly the 21st. We have the trough in position. That's what you got to have in the upper levels for a storm. We will have Arctic air flowing in from Canada. You got to have cold air for snow and high pressure. And if this thing would only work, all right, we got the same problems. Imagine a big blue H right there. High pressure will be in Quebec as we head through this weekend. That's what's supplying the cold air. And eventually it's going to be contrasted with warmer, more moist air that's going to circulate around a storm that will form on the coast and head up the coast late in the weekend, early next week. And by the way, boys and girls, if you're ever doing anything with a dry board and it's below freezing, these babies don't work. Next week it's going to be Grease Pen City. So anyway, there is going to be a storm off the southeast coast, I think, later in this upcoming weekend. The question is whether or not it will turn the corner enough, sharply enough, to bring snow to the southern Appalachians, the central Appalachians, up into the Poconos, the Catskills, and on into the mountains of New England. Right now, I tend to think that the storm is going to be more confined to the coastal areas than it will the mountains of the Northeast, but it wouldn't take much of a deviation in that track at all for the storm to throw heavy snow into those mountain ranges that I just mentioned. Regardless of whether or not that storm hits, it's going to help sustain a generally northwesterly flow over the northeastern and eastern part of the country. So as we head through the week of Christmas, cold air is going to continue to dominate. So even if the natural snow doesn't come to the mountains, and that's not out of the question yet, conditions will be favorable for continued very productive snowmaking. Now, as long as this trough stays in place, and I think it's going to stay in place right through the Christmas holiday, there will be other systems that come along this same general track. Another one is a threat along about the day or Christmas Day and perhaps 3 or 4 days later. So generally speaking, overall, east of the Mississippi, this looks like a wonderful Christmas holiday at the ski resorts. Skiers, riders, you'll have plenty of machine-made snow on which to play, and I do think Mother Nature is going to contribute as well. And every time that Arctic air comes over the lakes, these are the Great Lakes, if you couldn't tell from my beautiful artistry, there'll be more lake effect snow. A place like Snow Ridge east of Lake Ontario. I mentioned that in last week's Weather Weenie. They got 38 inches of snow in 24 hours late last week when that cold air came over the lakes. In the west, again, the coastal ranges will see some snow leading up to Christmas. It's going to be a little harder to come by in the inland ranges as the ridge dominates in the west, the trough dominates in the east as we head toward Christmas. Now, next week, we will be at Jiminy Peak, Massachusetts, and I'll have another installment of the Weather Weenies just prior to Christmas Day. We hope you'll take a look at that. But in the meantime, if you'd like a detailed snow report for your area, check out snowcountry.com. You can see some of the Skiing Weatherman videos there. And by the way, there's no W in Snow Country. I'm Herb Stevens, the Skiing Weatherman, and we'll have another Weather Weenies for you next week.